Nope. That's better. Hey folks, Darren with Fervent Astronomy. Today I'm going to take a look at modifying cameras for astrophotography. And I'm probably gonna make the title of this somewhat clickbaity. So I know I'm probably gonna be getting, let's say, various range of comments, possibly. If anyone watches this, I have no idea what'll happen. And there's a reason for this. I'm not just trying to be clickbaity, although that's just a side benefit, but I'm big into DIY. I'm big into tinkering and modding and all that kind of stuff. And I also recognize that not everyone is really set up to do it in the best way possible. And it's something where, especially for folks who might have limited resources, modding your own camera for astrophotography seems like a pretty good deal. It seems free, and it seems like you'll get the results you want, which is an increased sensitivity to hydrogen alpha emission in your images. However, you have to go into it if you have no experience, or even if you have experience, being okay with the fact that you might fry your camera. And this is why I don't recommend that people actually modify their own cameras if they're not properly set up for it, or if they're not able to easily absorb a possible failure. I have screwed up a lot of cameras over the years. A lot of them. Electrocuted myself a few times. There are dangers associated with this, especially if your camera has an internal flash and has a flash capacitor. So, you know, I've gone down the road. I enjoy it, and I highly and paradoxically both encourage you to get into camera repair or modifying or tinkering or what have you for fun and for results. But I also, on the same note, discourage you from ever touching a screwdriver or getting it near your camera if you're not fully prepared and okay with the fact that you might lose that camera. It just might become a brick. So with that in mind, I'm going to show you how to modify a Canon 6D for astrophotography in one of the most effective and cost-effective ways. But I am going to show you how to do it properly with all the proper tools. Now, I might be getting some feedback saying that I'm doing things improperly, or that I'm doing things the wrong way, or not somebody else's right way, etc., etc. And that's fine. I'm not the be-all, end-all of this kind of thing at all. I'm not the first one to do it. I won't be the last one. I'm not the best, but I've done it. I've done it successfully a lot. I have a lot of experience doing it, and take that and weigh it how you will. So first off, we're going to go through a little bit of the workstation, and we're going to show you some of the things that ideally you should have. There are some things that are a must, and then there are some things that are optional, and there's some things that will just preserve the safety of your actual equipment. So first thing, gloves. We need some type of way to prevent the oils in your skin from getting on your sensor. And this is one good way to do it. These are nitrile gloves. The side benefit here, of course, is that you also have a little bit of insulation in the case of any electrical contact. And, ooh, that's noisy. Speaking of which, Go away, noisy bag. We also have these gloves. They are kind of threaded with carbon fiber, I believe. And, you know, depending on who you ask, they're either a great investment or a waste of money. But these will help with static discharge, or at least they will theoretically help with static discharge. And the nice thing is that the fingertips are rubberized. Now, we might want them on or off at different points, depending on what we're doing. We do have our nitrile gloves underneath. And one of the reasons I like to wear these underneath these is simply because your hands do sweat, will sweat. They're sweating right now in these. Anyone who's worn rubber gloves will be familiar with that. However, it's locked inside the glove and it won't be seeping out through the material here, and you won't have to worry about any moisture adding to anything else. Even a little bit in the wrong spot can be bad news. So, okay, we've got our gloves. Now we're going to move to our workspace. So here you see I've got a blue mat. This is a silicone mat. You can get these online, you know, eBay, AliExpress, Amazon, what have you. They are set up for doing repairs for phones, for circuit boards, for all kinds of stuff, and they obviously work great for camera repair. So, you know, this one is nice and big. It's got lots of storage for parts and that kind of thing, and it has a lot of organization, screwdrivers over here, and there's various little areas where there's magnets actually embedded underneath here. And that's great because it provides some places where you can put screws or what have you. Here, you might notice this little wire leading off screen there. This is a little grounding cable. This cable ends in an alligator clip, and off screen, I actually have it connected to a basically a ground wire, which then I've wired into you know, do-it-yourself socket, wall socket, just to the ground, and I've put that into the wall outlet. And what this will do is an old trick from my days playing with vintage audio equipment, but it will provide a really solid ground right out to the ground in your home or building. And again, some people might say, oh, this is unnecessary, it does nothing, or this is the most important thing ever. It's definitely not hurting anything. It being there, it's a good thing to have. And to that same effect, and wired up in a similar way, we have this. This is a wristband, and again, the purpose is exactly the same. This is to ground you from static electricity. Now, many or most of you might live in a home with carpet, and just moving your feet around on the carpet can generate static. And this is a really handy way to just make sure you're being discharged. Again, connected into ground, and it's got an alligator clip on the end and this handy little springy coiled cable. So you got lots of room. You don't have to worry about that. So that will keep us from accidentally frying everything or anything. We might, you know, depending on circumstances, have a little bit of charge on us and accidentally touch something that we're not supposed to. And we don't want to short out some surface mount components because I'm betting not all of you are ready to do any SMD repair. So anyway, so we've got our little station set up. here, this is a little magnetic pad that I like to use. It is great for organizing screws, especially if you're going to do a one session sitting, or a one-day job where you're going to be able to remember where everything goes. This is great. If you don't think you'll remember where everything goes, record a video or take photos along the way. It's a great way to make sure that you know exactly where you're gonna need to put all those screws, because I can't tell you, there's been times where does this go? The camera's back together. Why do I have this leftover screw? Those aren't fun. Those are not fun times. So let's avoid that. And just to provide a little bit of demonstration, these are my receipts. These are camera parts, lens parts, all kinds. Bursting to the seams, motherboards, what have you. I have worked on a lot of cameras. I've broken some of them. I've taken other ones and I've donated parts to other cameras, what have you. So if you want receipts, these are my receipts. It's not my first time inside of a camera. And again, it's not to say that I'm the best person for it, but I'm at least not completely blind going in. So hopefully that at least gives you a little bit of confidence that I've at least been where I've said that I've been able to go. One of the things we're going to do today, we've got a Canon 6D. We're going to replace the shutter. This Canon, I can't remember, I have a stack of them waiting for modification, but this particular one has a very high shutter count. So we're in there anyway. Got some extra shutters on hand, got some more in the background there, and we're going to change that since we're already there. Okay, so we've got our Canon 6D, we've got our static insulation here, isolation. Now, one thing that you might think, okay, there's a bunch of little, what looks like Phillips head screws there. I'll just grab a jeweler's set of screwdrivers and away you go. Nope. The screws in pretty much every camera on the market are, while they look like Phillips, actually Japan Industrial Standard. So they're slightly different head, and as such, they have their own screwdrivers that work best for them. The shape of the head is different than your standard Phillips head screwdriver, and I have sheared fins off the heads of Phillips screwdrivers doing work on cameras. Once in a while you'll get a screw that's really in tight, or there's some thread lock on it or something. You need these. You can probably use jeweler's screwdrivers, and probably you might strip a few screws, but you might be able to get them back, that type of thing. But these are cheap. They're such a good investment. And just, these ones are, of course, they're made in Japan, and the brand is Vessel. I think I got them off Amazon. It doesn't really matter. You can get many different kinds, but these are Japan Industrial Standard, JIS screwdrivers. You need these. It's better to have these. So that's one thing to go over. Another kind of tool you're going to need is a set of spudgers. Now, if you've ever changed the screen in a phone or something to that effect, you're going to be familiar with spudgers, or if you've worked on electronics before, you're going to be familiar with spudgers. They are essentially little pry tools, and you have a number of different types. Every once in a while you have metal. For electronics, this is a no-no. This would be something that you could use for a a body component, or plastic on plastic, or metal on metal, or something where you need to wiggle in there and pry. Think getting the case open on some type of electronic gizmo. Let's see. For instance, I got a little Bluetooth speaker here. You would use this kind of tool to get in there and open it up. Not for circuit boards, not for PCBs. You need plastic spudgers, flat, kind of chisel shaped. Also, these a little more pokey ones, for lack of a better word, tapered ends. These help for opening and closing the locking mechanisms on flex cables. So those, or something to that effect, you will need. Here we've got a spanner wrench, lens wrench. This probably isn't going to come in handy during this particular repair or modification, but they can. And of course, tweezers. Lots of tweezers. These are very fine tipped. Again, you'll get one of these anytime you buy any kind of electronic repair stuff. Often we'll get bundled one of those, so I have quite an arrangement of them here. This is a lens blower, rocket blower. This particular one is quite big. You get a lot of air coming out of it, and it's got a filter. So it's got this little bit on the end, and this filter keeps dust from getting in and getting blown out. So this is really, really handy, especially if you intend to do this more than once. It's really good to have just in general, because it's also good for blowing the dust off sensors of any camera. You will eventually get some dust in there, and this can really help. Let's see, what else do we have here? I have a couple different solvents. Here I have some 99% rubbing alcohol, and this is acetone. This is, you can get it in your local drugstore or grocery store as nail polish remover sometimes. This is just an old acetone bottle that I keep refilling because the plastic does not degrade with acetone. Acetone will 100% will melt most plastics, so it's never really something you just want to be spraying all over the place. Typically, rubbing alcohol, 99% isopropyl. This you can spray, all over a circuit board, and it should be fine. If you need to clean a PCB or whatever, but you have to make sure it's 99%. You don't want water in there, or too much water. Another solvent we have, and this is actually an optical cleaning fluid. This is Eclipse solution. I think it's mostly methanol. I'm not sure what else might be in there. It's definitely a handy thing to have around, especially for cleaning sensors. Chances are you'll be the most careful person in the world, and you're still going to get dust or a smudge, or your finger's going to slip, or something. A little fleck of something's going to float down onto that sensor before you need to close everything up. And that is what's going to save your butt when combined with these. These are sensor swabs. These are by the same company, Photographic Solutions. These are somewhat older. I'm not sure if the packaging is the same, but this is a sensor swab. It is usually the only thing that should ever touch your sensor. And These I'm probably going to end up having to use because I will probably mess up, or there will probably be a little fleck of dust or something come down onto the sensor and I will need to clean it off. And this is how we're going to do it. Another thing that might be useful, of course, lens cleaning cloths. The your typical microfiber cloths are very good at cleaning all kinds of stuff, all kinds of optics or glass or what have you. It's good to have these around just in case. They can be used in concert with solvents as long as they don't have heavy dyes. You know, like that's not gonna probably be the one we're gonna want to use. A little too dark. That's definitely gonna leach out. Anyway, I also like to have cotton swabs, and while I don't have them within reach right now, also some PCB swabs. So these little swabs that have just a bit of soft material on them, and for cleaning PCBs. I hope we don't need that. I don't know what's going on inside of this camera. I've never actually cracked this one open, this particular camera yet. So this 160 is a mystery to me. And I'm just trying to figure out if if there's anything else that might be useful. This is not necessary, but it is a nice to have, especially if you do anything involving, you know, this kind of stuff where dust is an issue, you know, cleaning your lenses, if you're taking them apart, cleaning inside, scanning film, even, you know, home audio if you're doing vinyl and you need to get rid of some static. Essentially, it just creates two streams of charged particles, one stream of positive, one stream of negative. I can't really remember which is which when you squeeze the handle, but that just gets rid of all the static charge off of your whatever you're pointing it at. Okay, and I think that is probably everything that we could go over here with regards to the workstation. So one thing I'm going to do is actually show you the sensor from a 6D. I prepared this one earlier. Wow, there's going to be a lot of cheesy stuff like that. Stick around. So this is the sensor from a 6D, and we'll go through a number of the different layers here. So in the case of this particular setup, we've got a little metal retainer here. It will be screwed on right here and here and grounded here. Now, a lot of tutorials, a lot of people on the internet, on forums, everywhere are going to use the wrong terms, for lack of a better word, to describe a lot of the things that we have here. But I'm going to kind of give you a rundown on all of these specific pieces according to what the manufacturer actually calls them. You get a lot of people throwing around low pass filter and hot mirror and using them interchangeably. And as you'll see, there's probably a good maybe five or six different wafers in here. And some of them are bonded together. So it's going to not be very confusing at all. Don't worry about it. But we'll give you the proper language to describe this and know what each of these things are doing. So in this case, this is the top filter. This is the piece of glass that's facing the lens mount. This is the thing that dust will fall on. You might notice that there is a little flex cable leading out here, and it's bonded here to this strip on the side of the filter. This is the ultrasonic lens cleaner. I'm going to butcher the name. I never looked it up. Piezoelectric? Piezoelectric? Siri, how do you pronounce piezoelectric?
Piezoelectric.
Piezoelectric. All right. So this is the piezoelectric sensor cleaner. Basically, it will shake this piece of glass. It'll shake it an ultrasonic frequency. And does it even exist? Who even knows? And that will, this is not a very effective way to show people a piece of completely clear, transparent glass. The piezoelectric element there will shake the filter, vibrate it at ultrasonic frequencies, which will shake the dust off the sensor. So this is protecting the sensor from dust. That's one of its jobs. I'm not sure if it's coming through in the video, but you may also notice at certain angles that it will have a red kind of cast to it. It'll sort of reflect. Oh, is that working? It'll reflect red. This is because this is also called the hot mirror. This is, there's a coating on the top of this filter that, that will reflect infrared light. Now, when you look straight on, it looks clear. It'll just look clear, perfectly transparent. And then when you look at an angle, you can see that you'll get a red reflection and maybe even kind of a greeny blue. There you go. The reason for this is when the light hits dead on, or with an acceptable deviation in angle, it's going to pass through, or if it's infrared, which is not visible, as well as UV, it will bounce off. But if the light hits at too steep an angle, so you can imagine if the light is coming in like this, it's okay. Or if it was infrared, it'd go bounce off. But if it's coming from a steep angle, then what's going to happen is the wavelengths that the filter actually reflects are going to change. So with an increase in the angle of incidence, you actually get different, entirely different wavelengths being excluded because they're being reflected. And that's why it looks red, as you can see there, or greeny blue or what have you. So at any rate, that's a little background, but the hot mirror is, is coated on top of this particular stack. And then you also will have what's called a low pass or anti-aliasing filter. As part of this, this filter wafer, you're going to have this low pass element. And what that's going to do is, as a beam of light or a wave of light comes through, it's going to hit the filter and go through if it's visible light, but it's going to separate into two as it passes through. The purpose of this low pass filter or anti-aliasing filter is to help prevent moire in high-res digital photos, which is a pattern that can basically seem to be baked into the photo when you're dealing with textiles, things where you have a weave, that repeating pattern, and just the arrangement of the pixels and all the debayering that goes into it can, in the image, create a pattern that is not really desirable. So these low pass filters function to anti-alias the image, just blur it a little bit, and that will help prevent this repeating pattern more showing up in the photos. However, it does lower the resolution a little bit, but not really going to be that big a deal with a 20 something megapixel camera. You might notice the various cameras like the Canon 5DS and 5DSR. You'll have the 5DS has an aliasing filter, anti-aliasing filter rather, but the 5DSR actually cancels that effect out, so there's no anti-aliasing happening. And by removing the low pass, you get better raw detail, but it could be more of a problem if you're photographing textiles of some type. And the Nikon D800, D800E, that pair, the E also same thing, zeroed out the low pass effect. Sony A7R series that doesn't even have a filter in it, any low pass filter, and Nikon D850, what have you. There's a lot of different cameras out there. Some of them have a low pass filter and then cancel the effect out. Some don't have any low pass at all. And some, of course, like the Canon 6D we're going to modify here, it does have a low pass filter set. So this is a set of two filters in the filter stack. And this first one comes in, splits it into two, keeps going. So that's the top filter there. Now, that filter we're actually going to leave in, because one thing that you do need for doing astrophotography is a exclusion filter of some type to keep infrared and UV from getting in, because that will soften your image, bloat stars, that type of thing. You do want to exclude things that are outside of that visual spectrum while preserving the hydrogen alpha wavelengths. So that filter by itself provides, let's say, roughly, if memory serves, 93% ish, or with a standard deviation up and down a little bit, 93% of transmission for these wavelengths that we want. So that red, that 500 or 656 nanometer, point something, it will allow upwards of 90% of that light to get through the sensor, which is really good for free because you already have it in there. And the other nice thing about this is that you'll also maintain that sensor cleaning functionality, and you'll have something to protect it. Some folks will actually take all the filters that are in front of the sensor out, and I think that's a bad idea because you don't have actually anything to protect the filter, and then you have to buy a separate infrared UV filter to keep that full spectrum sensor from having to deal with those wavelengths. Or you'll have to buy like a clear glass, optically clear glass replacement filter, install that instead of the filter we're going to be removing, and then also get a UV infrared exclusion filter. And I mean, there's really no need. You're not getting that much benefit out of it. So get off the soapbox for a second. So as we see here, we took that one filter out. Now here there's a plastic little filter tray. This will sit in between the top filter there with the hot mirror and the infrared absorbing filter. So this particular filter, it is stuck down with a adhesive, and that will have been holding this on as well. I've had this apart quite a bit, so it's not going to be this easy in real life. We'll see later, But this is the filter that we want to remove. This is the infrared absorbing filter. And it's also, in this case, it's a filter stack, and it's bonded to what's called a wave plate. So this particular filter you can see as a greeny blue cast. Almost all digital cameras will have this type of filter, and its job is to absorb wavelengths that get through the hot mirror and ensure proper color balance in your images for the light that hits the sensor, and also, again, to exclude infrared by absorbing it. Now you can see that this sensor, or this filter rather, doesn't really matter what angle, it looks green. The world is seen through this filter is just a little more greeny blue than without it. So that means that all the light coming through this particular filter, coming through, a lot of the red is actually going to kind of get shifted or excluded. Infrared's going to get excluded. It's not going to, of course, filter it out entirely, but removing this is what's responsible for really changing the white balance of the camera. You may have heard that by modifying your camera that it won't really be good for traditional photography anymore, or you'll have to use white balance card or something to that effect. And the reason why is because this filter is responsible for what the camera expects to see on the sensor. So the way your camera does the math to interpret colors keeps in mind the light that comes through this sensor, or I keep calling it a sensor, I apologize. It's doing the math based on the light that gets through this filter to the sensor. So without it, it's doing its internal math wrong. It's going to display the image wrong on the back of the screen, or at least it's going to show different shifted colors rather. And it's also going to give you images that are really saturated in the red all around, including, everything else besides the emission nebula that you're trying to capture. However, once you correct for that, you will have gathered more red light in a wider band of wavelength for that particular nebula that you're imaging. So you will get the effect afterwards, but just know this is the culprit about why you can't then easily use the same camera for traditional daytime photography. Okay, I've got a little setup here to demonstrate what's happening with these filters. I just have a remote control. This is an infrared remote control. You can see it's got a little light blinking in it, a little infrared bulb. And here I've got the infrared absorption filter / wave plate hooked up with some helping hands. And so we're going to show you how this thing blocks infrared. Oh, you can see it there. Turn the light off here. Okay, you can see it flashing. I move down and it's gone. Move back up. There it is. Move down. Move back up. Here's the test with the so-called hot mirror and the side of the hot mirror facing the infrared source is that's how it's orientated right now, or oriented. Okay, so one last little test here. We have the hot mirror and the absorption filter there. And we have our infrared light source here. You can probably see the remote control. So we're going to do our best to shine this dead on, and you should be able to see it reflected. Here we go, in the hot mirror, but not in the absorption filter. That's because the hot mirror is reflecting the infrared and the absorption filter is not. This is also called a dichroic mirror, where it reflects some wavelengths but has a wildly different transmission or reflectivity for others. So in this case, it reflects infrared but allows visible light to go right through, and this guy just eats it up. So there you go. So we've got that. And next, and I should explain what the wave plate does. This is a very crude explanation, and it's not maybe factually correct. You can look up all this stuff online. It's really interesting to learn about optical engineering and the way light works. But if you can remember that our low pass filter there split our light into two, for lack of oversimplification, lack of a better explanation. This wave plate will it's not actually turning the light, but it is changing the polarization. It's rotating the polarization, if you can think of it like that. So that when that light hits the next low pass filter, because there are two, when it hits the next low pass filter, you get another splitting again. All right. Well, I want to do a little experiment to show you something pretty cool. It's not really too relevant to the actual DSLR modification here, but this is just too neat to pass up. So here we have our infrared absorbing filter, which, as discussed, is also it's a 2-filter stack. It's got that infrared absorption color balance effect, but it also has the phase layer or the phaser array or quarter wave plate component. And what this does, it's pretty neat. It actually induces a circular polarization into the light that's going through it. So based on the material it's made out of, as light comes through, unpolarized light, where the waves are oscillating in all different kind of directions, when they go through the filter here, depending on the direction that they're oscillating, they'll actually move through the filter at different speeds. And they'll do that by about 1/4 of a wavelength. And this is pretty cool because that will induce a circular polarization on the other side. And that's what allows this light to then move on to the second low pass filter and get anti-aliased again. So that's pretty cool. I would really recommend looking up circular polarization, quarter wave plates. It's neat stuff, but I've got a little experiment here to show you what's going on. So for this experiment, we actually have 2 linear polarizers, not circular polarizers, because a circular polarizer actually incorporates a quarter wave plate into it. So these are linear polarizers. And if we put them together and we turn one of them relative to the other one, we can see that the transmission of light either increases or decreases depending on their orientation. If you know anything about polarizers and polarization, you know this is because the polarized light coming through this filter is perpendicular to the polarized effect of this filter, so this one's blocking it basically. So now we're gonna put a little gap in between the two of them there, and as we can see, they obviously both transmit fine except when together. And we're gonna take our quarter wave plate filter, I'm gonna put it right in between the two, and when we're at the correct angle, you can see it will actually counteract that exclusion effect based on polarization, because it's taking the linearly polarized light and it's circularly polarizing it. Just thought that was so cool. So that's what that does. And here, because this sensor has seen better days, we actually have the final filter. This is the final piece of glass that goes in front of the sensor, the bare sensor itself. This one, the ceramic that normally encloses the filter has kind of come off on it. So it's sort of cracked off here on the back. You can ignore that. But you can see that this particular filter is pretty clear. It's optically clear. Doesn't have a lot of a color cast to it. Doesn't really reflect much. It's sort of reflecting ambient light though. And the job of this, beyond protecting the bare sensor, is that there is another low-pass filter in the Canon 6D. It is important to note that this arrangement can vary widely and differ from camera model to camera model, between brands and even within brands. So this is a common one, and the 6D is a commonly modified camera. So please keep that in mind. So I know what you're thinking. Why did we all of a sudden jump cut to a softbox with continuous light? What's going on? Well, I have an experiment I want to do. I don't know if this is going to be before or after the first experiment done in this way. So, be prepared for this to happen again, or this is the second time or something. What I have is the front filter, which is the, as we discussed, low pass filter, the first low pass filter, anti-aliasing filter. And I have two linear polarizing filters, which you can see when they are on their own. They're transparent. They're polarizing light, however. But when you add them, they essentially turn into a adjustable neutral density filter, a variable ND filter. So right now, the polarization is at right angles for the two filters, and they basically are blocking out all the light. And I wanted to find a way to visualize what the low pass filters were doing, and I'm so stoked because I found a way. Again, based on where this clip ends up in the larger video itself, when light comes in through the filter, it's unpolarized, typically, if it's natural light or incandescent or candlelight, or hopefully in this case, compact fluorescence. But that means that there's light waves with their orientation of their waves are all over the place. Some are oscillating up and down, left and right, at angles, all over the place. And depending on those directions of their individual polarization, as they hit this plate, the refractive index is different based on the polarization. So effectively what will happen is some light will be directed a little bit left, refracted a little bit left. Some will be refracted a little bit right. And that's what gives us the first part of our anti-aliasing effect. This filter is essentially splitting, this light, as again is discussed numerous times in this video probably. But here's the cool thing. So we've got our polarizers, and they are at right angles, and we will slip this filter in between them, and presto, you can see we've got some nice separation there. Nice little rainbow effect happening. But you might also notice that light's actually making it through. And that's because what this filter does is it refracts these light waves, but it refracts them and it basically polarizes them as well. And because they come out of this thing with a sort of organized polarization, you need the wave plate, which will be discussed later or has already been discussed, to induce a circular polarization so that when they go through the second low pass filter here, they can be split again in a different direction. And so let me set this back up. So here we've got perpendicular filters, and we will put this second plate in here. And if you'll notice, that rainbow, either I mean, I'm not a physics major, so I hesitate to call this birefringence, but that may well be what it is. You'll notice the colors kind of split or go horizontally. They're kind of split vertically there. And this is the opposite. Yeep. This is the opposite of the first filter, which you can see how they're oriented at right angles. And the fact that these two low pass filters are their effects are at right angles is what's responsible for basically completing that anti-aliasing effect. So here, when we add them together, the addition of vertical and horizontal ends up being diagonal. And I didn't try this. There should be an additive effect when we have them in the same orientation like that. So that's pretty cool. And I'm so stoked that I found a way to demonstrate all this. And yeah. All right, one last little look. I have our filters all stacked up just like they would be in the camera. And we're gonna see what happens here. And if they would stay in the right orientation, you'll notice that a lot of the wild, wacky rainbow has been resolved. And what you're getting through is more of an even light. It's not perfect because, I'm not holding them very well. They're kind of askew, but yeah, versus how they act individually. It's pretty cool. But again, this filter is a low pass filter, anti-aliasing, and what it will do, we had our first one that split the light a little bit, and then it was rotated. How can I do this? This must look real weird. Oh, I don't know, guys. Okay. So, oh, hey. So I wasn't entirely happy with my explanation of how the anti-aliasing effect here works. So I've set this up really haphazard fashion, and I'm going to try and do this really quick. We have our first filter. This is the hot mirror / low pass filter. Here we have our wave plate / infrared absorbing filter. Here we have our final filter, the second low pass filter, and we have our CMOS sensor, of course. So essentially, you can imagine if none of this nonsense, none of these filters were in the way. Let's imagine there was a dot. We're taking a picture of a dot, and that dot, once the light comes in here and hits the sensor, would be 1 pixel. 1 pixel across. Now, our dot isn't just giving off one photon. It's giving off a lot of photons, a lot of light waves, and they're coming here. And this would be a good time to research polarization if you've never heard of it before. But the light waves are waving, let's imagine, in different directions, all randomly different directions. And so they come and they hit this filter. Now this filter uses the phenomenon, and I'm going to say this wrong probably, called birefringence. And what this means is, based on the polarization of a beam of light, when it goes through this filter, it will have a different refractive index as compared to light that's polarized in a different way. So you have all this randomly polarized light hits here. Some of it maybe diverges a little left, some maybe diverges a little to the right. And so if this filter wasn't here and this filter wasn't here, when this light made it to the sensor, what you would get before we had a 1 pixel dot, now you'd get 2 pixel dots. You'd get one next to the other. Hopefully you're following along. Now the light comes here, we now have 2 dots, and it goes through our wave plate. As we demonstrated, or will demonstrate depending on where I put it in the video, this wave plate will change the polarization of the light. I'll just rotate it into a different orientation, and it will, remember we have 2 dots now, it'll continue on its way until it hits this final low pass filter. Now this low pass filter and this low pass filter are oriented at right angles, I believe. And so what will happen, since our light has now been rotated, the polarization's been rotated, we have our 2 beams of photons, or 2 little dots coming through. This is going to split them again. And based on their polarization, some of the little dots or some of the light rays are going to go up, some are going to go down, let's imagine. And in our second dot, same thing. Some will go up, some will go down. And when they hit the sensor here, you'll have 4 little dots. So you'll essentially have a blurring of what would have been a 1 pixel detail coming in here, and it will end up as 4 when it hits there. So that's hopefully a little bit correct. It's really cool. Physics is fun. I highly recommend that if you found that even a little bit interesting or confusing, you do some research online, because it's great and cool. All right. This is it. In this particular model, you can see all the contacts here. I had to take this off of its PCB. Some of them have them integrated. This one, I needed the PCB, so the sensor was all bunged up, but the PCB was good. So in this case, all these little gold leads are helping to read out the sensor. And what you have here on top, this will have all the micro lenses. So each pixel will have a tiny little micro lens on it that will function to help direct that light into the pixel. Then underneath that, you'll have the Bayer arrangement with 1 blue, 1 red, and 2 green filters. Oh, there we go. Hopefully that's showing up. So it's a 2x2 arrangement, 4 pixels, and 1 red, 1 blue, and 2 green in the Bayer pattern, and they will each read certain wavelengths of light, and then the camera will do math to de-Bayer those responses to decide what color the pixel was. And again, this was connected to this. This is the PCB. It collects all the information. Probably has the analog to digital converter on it. And away it goes. So that is our lead-in, and we haven't even put a screwdriver on that camera yet. So Bayer sensor, low pass filter, it's the final filter. Here we have our wave plate and our infrared absorbing filter, color balance filter. Little harness and hot mirror / first low pass filter, and then this little metal harness. Now, what we're gonna do is remove that green blue filter. All of this nonsense is just to do that. As you can see though, we have to take this top off, we have to take the plastic harness off, we have to get the filter off of the, we have to get the green filter off of the final filter without scratching anything, breaking anything, without letting any dust get in under this, which is always a challenge. And then we need to get this back on and all put back together. So it's easier said than done, at least when it comes to keeping dust out of the mix. But finally, we're gonna put this away and we're gonna get started. Canon 6D. DSLR. Yeah, magnesium body on this thing, some plastic bits, and overall pretty straightforward. So let's get started. First thing we're going to do is we are going to remove we're going to move the rubber grip. These can break down over time as oils from your hands get in under there, or sweat or what have you. So it's kind of yuck. Yeah, sometimes you can just soak it in a little bit of solvent and kind of get some of that oil out. Sometimes you need to replace them. I don't know what we're going to do this time, but take off the eye cup. Gonna take off this one. Take off the grip cover. Sometimes the adhesive will stick on the camera and tear off. It's not the end of the world. Typically you can leave the camera cover on the bayonet. I don't think you'll need to take that off. And this one, it should be able to get the front face off without any trouble. Okay, so now we have screws on the bottom, on the back, on the right, on the left, on the top, and the front. So you can use any organization system that you want. In my case, there also may be one in there, depending on the model. I don't think there's one in there in this camera, but there is one right here. So in my case, I like to do it in sections. So I'm going to take my screwdriver and I'm going to lay them out. It's my personal quirk. I'm going to lay them out in the same pattern in which I remove them to help make sure that I don't have to think too hard about where they go. Now, they are different sizes. There are various sizes and types of screws. Some camera manufacturers standardize screws, so every screw on the body is one type. Canon, at least on these DSLRs, wasn't that company. But we'll make do. Let's keep these a little more compact. It is very helpful, but not necessary, to have a little magnetic pad like this. You can see this particular work mat has a number of numbered screw holders, for lack of a better term, where you can place your screws in order or in any way that helps you organize. The other thing is that's really handy, and you'll get them in most repair kits for electronics, is a magnetizing and demagnetizing block here. By rubbing our screwdriver on this little magnet, we can magnetize it, which helps keep our screws from getting lost. I would recommend doing this in a tidy, clean workspace where there are few, if any, escape routes for a tiny screw if you were to drop it. They are often completely impossible to recover. I've spent many hours looking for screws, so keep that in mind. So in the 60, this little cover comes off separately, and there's a screw right here that screws into the strap ring here from underneath. Now you can't forget to take the diopter adjustment screw out. Now there are two types of screws, and the threading will tell you what type is what. You won't have to ever know anything about this unless you forget where things go, and you need to find a way to figure it out. But screws that screw into plastic, for the most part, will have a wide, sharp thread, a very coarse thread. And screws that will end up threading into metal are going to have a finer machine thread. So that is something to keep in mind. Now, you'll usually be able to just lift it right off, but you don't want to pull it off. Just want to lift it up. As you can see here, there's a ribbon cable. So just pop that up, and this is our LCD. This one looks clean. No signs of any liquid ingress. That's good. Okay. Next. Ooh, sticky. Pull off the rear cover here. You can see it's just plastic. It's one of the weaker parts of the camera. This side door can't come off until we remove the top here. So we're going to detach a couple of these cables. Can't quite remember which ones are which, but we're going to have to take them all off anyway. So I'm going to be very, very careful here. I don't know if you can see, but here we have our flex cable lock, and right here is a little capacitor or something. So we want to make sure that we don't accidentally scrape that off the board. There we go. Now, these can be a little bit tricky. And I sometimes have a little bit of trouble with them. These are for the microphone and the little speaker here. Okay, it's looking pretty good. This camera is kind of sticky. There we go. So this one gave me a little bit of trouble because it's goopy adhesive there that helps hold on the back of the nameplate. So normally this sits here. So with the 60, this is very important. You can't get this panel off until you're able to lift the top off enough that you can then access it. But there's a slot right here, and then there's a slot right here See this one, goes through, and you want to remove any SD cards. There's a fin here, and that goes in this little blind slot, and then there's a little micro switch here, and this switch goes through here. And then there's a little piece of plastic here that goes through and pushes the switch. And both of these are very delicate. I mean, the fin is metal, but you can bend it, and you can easily wreck that switch. So you have to be very careful about that. But we can also remove the top. And as you can see, we've got a flex cable right here. And that is the top of our camera. Okay, so now we're down to the innards. And this is where you're likely to break something. So we need to be gentle and careful here. You're going to want to pull this heat pad off. This is a little heat transfer pad. We'll put that on later. And you're going to want to pull back this heat transfer tape. And next we're going to take off this heat shield, I think. Okay, so we'll take off this little transfer pad. And yeah, that's connected in there. Okay. Now this is conductive tape, or heat conductive tape, which helps to conduct heat away from some of the electronic components here. And it's put onto a shield here, which I guess is acting like a little bit of a heat sink. Yeah, and this particular one is anchored underneath. It wraps around the main board. So there's a connection here and a connection here. And you're going to want to gently lift that off. You can see the tape runs under the main board there. So this is another thermal pad. We can leave that where it is. We have to take off these cables. Need to be very careful removing this one. Don't want to bend anything. So yeah, we can go through. Okay, now this cable connects the sensor to the body, so we're going to take it up, connects the sensor to the main board rather. I'm going to take it up off the sensor electronics. Okay. Got one more screw here. Now we're going to want to have a static isolating bag. This static isolating bag will help protect our main board. So these can be purchased online, of course, or you can also save them if you ever buy a hard drive or something. Just keep them around. They're handy to have if you're ever going to do this type of work. Now, right here, there's a connection point. So we have to gently pry. Take that off. And one more right here. Oh, I guess not. This is the piezoelectric sensor cleaner connection. So we've got our main board. Safely put that off to the side. Now we have our sensor. So there are a couple things that we're going to want to do. Right here there's a pad. We're going to want to let's push this pad back. Remove this screw. Remove this plate. And then remove this heat transfer tape. You do want to be careful not to tear it, especially the connection to the sensor. You don't want to lose any of the thermal path. This pad here is interfering a little bit. Okay. So now you've got thermal pad here. You've got the piezoelectric connection, which I've preemptively removed. You have the sensor is a 3-point 1, 2, 3 connection here. And if memory serves, I need to remove this as well. So I'm going to have to remove these screws. This is the plate that anchors the tripod attachment. And this particular set of screws is a little beefier. This is the bottom power distribution board. We ought to be careful with that. But just have to go here. There we go. And case in point, I just dropped a screw. So this is a rather handy thing to have. It's a magnetic sweeper. It will help sweep up lost screws like that. I have it because I do that a lot. And again, okay, so now we have our sensor and everything ready to go, but we're not going to take it out just yet. There are 3 screws, and these are Torx style, and these screws are what not only holds the sensor in place, but what adjusts the tilt of the sensor. So we're looking at it from the back like this. Now, there are springs on the other side of these attachment plates. And based on how close, how tight or loose the screws are, the sensor is going to be closer or further. And depending on how tight or loose any individual screw is, the sensor is going to have a tilt. So we need to preserve this. Now, the ideal way to do it, and the way that I do it when I do a modification, is I actually put it onto a calibration bench, and I will double check and recalibrate the flatness of the sensor if I need to. You're not going to really be able to do that most likely. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to try and make sure that we preserve this as closely as we possibly can. And that's going to require a couple of things. One way we can do that is by marking the screws themselves. And one way to mark the screws is to use nail polish. I use this for my nails. Not really, I use this for basically painting, doing repaints on cameras. But in this case, we can use it actually for marking our screws, because we want to know what position the screws were in originally. And I'll explain that in a second. So, got our nail polish. And in this case, I'm going to get a hobby blade. And what I'm going to do is I want to mark the side of the screw. You'll see there's a screw, and then there's a little plastic post that helps register it in the right orientation, or register the sensor. So we're going to just put just a little dab of this onto the side of the screw facing that post. So we've got our nail polish on there. And then if we want, we can take a thin Sharpie and a black dot so we know exactly where it is. Okay. All right, so now comes one of the tricky parts. And okay, so now we're going to have to do some counting. Sounds like fun, right? Okay. So we've got our Torx bit. Now your first inclination is going to be counterclockwise to remove the screw. Oh, no. What we're going to do is do it clockwise, and we're going to count the number of revolutions that it took to get us all the way clockwise. So in this case, 3/4, 1, half, and about 1/4. And you're going to hit a hard stop. You're not going to be able to twist it anymore. So for this bottom one, it's 1 or 1 1/4 turns clockwise. Same thing up here. Quarter, half, quarters, well, just about 1. And then this guy, quarter, half, 3/4. Not quite 1. It's like 0.8 or 3/4. Okay. Now we can take it back the other way. Now what you will want to do in this case is you're going to want to preserve these screws in the same orientation that you had them originally. So that means they need to go back in the same place that you got them from. You do want to be gentle to make sure you don't accidentally scratch your marks off. I've done various things over the years, from trying to etch marks the screw to all kinds of stuff. So do what works for you, although this method is pretty low risk. Okay. There you have it. So I keep this box around. I can't remember what it's from, but it works really well for keeping a sensor safe. So you're just going to want to gently lift your sensor out. There it is. Okay. Now, you'll notice there are little springs. And they belong to each of those 3 screws. So there you go. Now, I want to get off that shutter so that I can replace the shutter. So I'm going to keep recording here, and we'll add that as a little bonus. This is the PDAF, Phase Detect Autofocus module. Now, unfortunately, the module in the 6D cannot be adjusted, so we want to really make sure that our sensor is back correctly. Okay. Okay. So here we have our shutter. It's connected here, here, here. And all the electrical connections look like they've been disconnected. And that's the shutter, just that simple. And now we're just going to pop in our new one. Okay. Now you can actually buy these parts direct from Canon a lot of times, such as Canon Canada up here, although some of them are not available anymore. So these I got off eBay, but they are brand new parts. And yeah, essentially you can see it's the same. And this particular one, you can see, doesn't come with the cables there, so we're going to have to detach those ourselves. But should be pretty easy to do. So, first things first. You can tell they're brand new because the flex cables don't have any bends or creases in them, unlike these, which have been bent already. So this is the same shutter is actually in the 6D and the 6D2, at least more or less the same. So what they've done, Canon's discontinued the shutter from the 6D, but obviously not the 6D2 because I believe they still produce that camera. Okay, so we have to get these connections off. Okay. So you can see we've got our two shutters there. Okay. Oh, maybe the view there wasn't the best based on the way I've got my workstation set up here. But we've now got our wires soldered back into the motor, and can take this, put it back there. Now, if I had the time, I might get some black silicone and stick it in there and let it cure, but I kind of want to finish this video. I still have to mod the sensor. So I'm going to use one of my go-tos, which is this Bondic UV curing resin. Just a little pen, and let's squirt some of this on there. Cover it up. Hit it with the UV. And it will solidify instantly, and it is a non-conductive substance, so we don't have to worry about electrical conductivity. It is going to be nice and insulated. Nice and secure. Okay. Now that we've taken that little detour, we are ready to reinstall our shutter. Move this tape cover. Get our main body back. Just gonna give it a little clean. Okay. And there we go. Put our screws back. Okay, so that's the shutter. Now it's time to reckon with the sensor. So there's a screw here and a screw here. There are little tabs here and here. And we already have some dust. Already have some dust inside the sensor as well. Okay. So again, this is our hot mirror. We want to keep this very clean. It's important to remember that any dust, the closer to your sensor, the more it's going to show up in your images. Okay, now we have our little phase plate slash excluding filter, or infrared excluding filter, color balance, what have you. It's got posts in here, and it is bonded there with some of that, basically a double-sided adhesive tape. So we don't want to make too much of a mess, but we might want to add a little bit of acetone. Just not sure that I really want to do that at this stage. So I'm gently prying with the spudger. I don't know if you can see. There's a little gap there. And slow and steady. You don't want to make fast or hard movements here. Just firm, but slow and gentle. Okay. Now we've gotten a little lucky. I've actually gotten underneath the double-sided tape, and that will allow us to pull this filter up off the sensor. So I'm just going to keep slowly working under the tape. You can see that the harness is already coming off. But it's going to make it easier if I can stay under that tape. And at this point, it's pretty much just taking the harness off. So we'll let it. Okay. Now, there's a pitfall to be had here in that the tape, the strands of adhesive can stretch quite far, and if they snap and get on the low pass filter underneath here, it's a pain in the butt to clean them off. You got to remove the adhesive. So it's better for that not to happen. However, we can pull it out from underneath the filter here. There we go. Ooh. Perfect. This is exactly what we want. It's coming off without residue. Okay. All right, so now we're at an important stage. it's just sitting on top there. And what I want to do is I want to take it off and then without getting any dust on it, I want to put this one back on. Now we need to ensure there is no dust on here first. And this is where it comes in handy to have this static gun or anti-static gun. Okay. Now that's not the ideal situation. I would have preferred it not to fall onto the sensor. Hey, I'm coming at you from a couple days later because I got so excited that I forgot to tell you to do something, and I forgot to do it myself. And I noticed while I was editing the video, so I got to take the camera apart all over again. Fun! So what we want to do is, you'll notice that I had taken off that black adhesive material that holds the green absorption filter onto the actual sensor. Well, you can't just leave it like that. You do have to replace it. So I've pre-cut some double-sided tape here. This is very, very thin double-sided tape. And I'm going to take the sensor and I'm going to apply it. Now, there was a little bit of adhesive left around here. You can see it. I'm going to leave that. Ironically, it was holding the black plastic filter harness on there a little bit, but not enough to be sealed. The hot mirror, the front filter there, actually on the top of the black filter harness, there's a gasket, and so that's what seals that part. But here we're going to need something to keep it nice and sealed. All right, so here we have our double-sided tape. I cannot overstate what a pain in the rear this is to have to do it all over again. So you might consider having a little checklist or something, especially if you're distractible like me. And yeah, this will keep the sensor sealed from any dust or moisture incursion. So that's it. This is iPhone video, so if it seems a little bit out of place, that's because it's now like 2 or 3 days later. All right. Fingers crossed. Right on. Okay, so can see we have our filter here. Keep it safe. You never know when you might want to possibly reverse your modification. So now, speaking of reversal, we have to put everything back together. It's not always the most interesting, but I will record it anyway. All right. Oh. So this is probably, for most of you, the second most trepidatious thing or part of this whole process, and that is, of course, we did the dangerous part. Now we have to get this thing back nice and flat the way it was previously. So this time we're going to do them clockwise all the way in. And don't do them one at a time, do them a little bit each. Tighten them all the way down, just like we did right before we undid them. Now, I did mark the screws. Another thing you could do is, if you're really careful not to slip, is you could mark your screwdriver, or remember as you turn it which face is pointing where, whatever works best for you. I like a way that doesn't disappear if I accidentally slip or get distracted or something like that, but that's just my suggestion. Now what we're going to do is we're going to reverse. So this one will do one turn. This one will do, basically until our little mark is pointing back at the post here, just over 3/4 of a turn. This one we're going to do 1 1/4 turns, this time anti-clockwise. So don't worry if your screws, after you tighten them in, end up in a slightly different position than where they started off. For instance, this one was supposed to be about 80% of the way there. It's now 1 full turn. The loosening and then tightening and all of that. It's a plastic thread that the screw is going into. It can have a little bit of difference there, but you more than likely, unless you didn't tighten it down all the way, you more than likely will have just a small deviation. So in this case, we know that we can do it back that way. Good. And this one's also one. Good. And then this one is 1 1/4. And that's pretty much exactly where I expect it to be. So it's 1/4, and that is 1. And that's all there is to that. At this point, it's just reversing everything we did to take the camera apart. Hey, it's me from the future again. One thing I did forget to do and mention was all of the sensor screws there. You'll notice there's like a black material on them. Ooh, that's not very stabilized. Sorry for the shakiness. There we go. So that is a little bit of a a locking glue that keeps the screws from basically working themselves out. So what I've done, I used some of the Bondic pen that we used earlier when we were doing the shutter, and that material will just help to glue those screws in place, kind of in a very reversible way. There we go. One thing to note is never to do astro imaging with a modified 6D, 5D Mark III, possibly 5DS, 5DSR, 5D Mark IV, 5D Mark II, blah, 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 7D. You get the idea. Never do imaging in live view. And you can see, oh neat. Got a little bit of focus there somehow. Or no, is it just a reflection? Oh, it's just reflection. I'm silly. Anyway, never do imaging out of live view with these cameras because they will, in live view, put out a strong internal light source, infrared light source, and it will spoil all your frames. It is something that's common to a lot of these cameras. I can't tell you how many times I forgot, set up a time lapse, and then essentially just forgot about it. So yeah, that's not a mistake that you want to make. Trust me. It is really, really sad when you come back after, 7 hours of imaging to find that all your frames have this gross, like, pink or purple splotches and a line through it and all that kind of stuff. So do your focusing in live view and then turn live view off and then image normally like you would with an intervalometer or however you're going to do it. Put a little note on here if you need to, because I need to. Turn live view off before imaging, because I wish I haven't done it more than one time. You'd think I'd learn after the first time, but I haven't. So there you go. But that is our 6D. And, not sure how long that took, an afternoon. Talking to camera and replacing a shutter. So I hope you found that interesting. I don't know if it's going to be necessarily, too much of a wild ride of entertainment, but hopefully it was of use. I hope that I was able to give some good insight into how to do repairs or modifications, and I hope I was able to encourage you to Either do it properly or get someone else to do it. You know, the one point I forgot to reapply my static isolation here. You know, we got dust on the sensor. It just found its way in. The second that there was a gap, static charge pulled dust in between the sensor filters. You know, these things you're just going to have to deal with if you're going to be doing this. So if you're not prepared to break your camera, if you're not prepared to invest a little bit into the proper tools, at the very least, please JIS, Japanese Industrial Standard, or Japan Industrial Standard screwdrivers. It's not a Phillips. It's a little bit different and different enough. If you're not willing to do that, then pay somebody to do it. There's a lot of very professional companies out there. They have dust-proof workstations where, you know, it's not a problem. You won't have to worry about it. And you'll have the peace of mind knowing that you'll get your camera back, and that you're covered in the event of anything going wrong there. So, but by that same token, I love DIY. I love tinkering. It's so fun. And if you're that kind of person who really wants to tinker and learn and enjoys that type of thing, by all means, I encourage you to look into doing this. You can get sometimes for some of the cameras, repair manuals or parts manuals online where you can actually see where all the parts go and you know, tell if you need a spare part, what the part number is, that type of thing. I really do encourage you, if you're the type of person who wants to dive into DIY, into tinkering, fixing, that type of thing, do it. It's awesome and fun and really rewarding. If you're the type of person who just wants a modified camera and they don't want to spend the money to get somebody to do it compared to what a screwdriver costs, just please know that it's not a zero risk proposition. Yeah, I'll get off the soapbox. I hope you've enjoyed this. Take care. If you have anything to say to me, drop a comment. I can't promise I'll respond if it's not constructive, but hey, and at the very least, I hope this helps somebody out there. So take care and clear skies.